Hey everyone, it's GameDev with Drew, and I'm back to doing tutorials. So recently I've been looking over my previous tutorials and other tutorials in the Godot scene, and I realized that there's a couple bad practices being taught to beginners. YouTubers like Bitlitic are addressing these problems, such as in his video of components and classes, but I feel like I just wanted to give a more in-depth scenario as to what you should be doing when you are a beginner in Godot. So I have this basic scene that I created. I can play it for you guys. So we have a wizard who's me, and we have a couple ghosts who are following me. And the ghosts can run into you, and they restart the game. So that's super simple. But if we look under the hood, we're going to see that we have a couple things that might want to be looked at. Let's go into the player's code first. And let's see that there's a couple things that want to be touched on, such as we just extend character body to D, we have a variable for speed, and then all of our code is under physics process. While that could be okay, as the game gets bigger, you're not going to want to have all your code under physics process or process. It just gets too unreadable. If we go into the enemy, we can see that it's kind of the same thing. We have the character body 2D, which again, it extends character body 2D. We have another variable speed, and we have a variable for player and the direction. Under func ready, we get the player from the parent and get node. And under func physics process, we do a little bit of vector math, and we set our velocity to that direction and the speed, which is just simple code that you guys probably have done in a tutorial, maybe even a tutorial that I made before. So what are the problems with it? First off, this piece of code in the enemies is really not safe. If I were to want to organize my enemies, let's see, I'll make a node 2D, and I'll just call it enemies. Let me drag all my enemies in there, and I press play. The game crashes, and the reason why is because there is an invalid access to the property of global position on a null instance. So the first thing that I want to talk about is export variables. Export variables are super handy when you want to get access to something that you know is going to happen before the scene starts. So I want access to the player, and I know that I can get access to the player because I can select it in the editor. So I have an export var player. But here's the problem. When you just do export var player, you need to give a variable type to the initializer. And that's where the next thing comes up. We can see that both in my player code and in my enemy code, I don't have any types for anything. So our player is a character body 2D. So we'll call it a character body 2D. So since we statically typed character body 2D for our player, why don't we statically type all of our code? Because it's been proven that it makes your game run faster, and it also allows for autocomplete. So let's do speed. We can change this to a float, and we can change this to a float. We can also do, in the enemy, we can make the direction a vector 2, because it takes in a vector 2. So now that we added all of that, we can actually just delete this func_ready code. We can then go into our main. We can select our enemy, and we can see that there's a new player property in the inspector. Let me assign this to player, and we'll go through to do the rest of them. You can just shift click all of them since they're all enemies. So now we can press play, and they do the same thing that they did before. The next thing that I want to cover is classes. In general, for me and what I've seen in the community is that most of the scripts that you should be writing should be their own classes. So What I mean by that is at the top of your player script or your enemy script or any script at all, you'll see it extends something. So my player extends character body 2D. What this means is I'm making a new script that extends the class of character body 2D. But what I want to do is I want to make my own class. So I can type in class name, player. With that, I can take my previously written export variable and make it just for players. We can see how that changes in our export inspectors when we hover over our enemy. Let me clear it. And now it only selects the player. Previously, we could see our enemies down there, but now we can just only see the player, which is just cleaner. The next thing that we can do, you might have noticed in my hitbox, I check that if the body is in the group of player. I don't tend to use groups. I teach using groups, but I don't tend to use groups myself, even though they sometimes might be useful. I use classes or collision shapes and masks instead. Let me know if you want me to do a video on that. So instead of doing if body is in group player, you can just check if a body is player. And this is keyword just checks if some node is a type of node or is a type of class. You can see that that doesn't change any of our functionality in our game if I go up and touch the coast. See? It still kills us because our body is a player. The final thing that I want to go over is realizing that this might be a lot of stuff to do. As you build more complex enemies, though that this enemy isn't very complex, you might want to realize that you're going to be rewriting a lot of the same code. And simply that's not fun. You can see that already my player and my enemy share a var of speed. And if I make a new enemy, they're also going to have a var speed, a var player, a var direction. So honestly, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to extract the var of speed and velocity processes into what's called a component. So we're going to make what's called a velocity component. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new scene, and I'm going to make it just a normal node. I'm going to rename this node to velocity component, and I'm going to save it into a new folder of components. And I'm going to make a new folder, obviously, for my velocity component. And after I make my script, I'm going to make a new class for my velocity component. After you create your class, you're going to realize what you want to take from your pre-existing nodes so that you can make everything modular in the end. So I can see that both from my player and my enemy, that they have a variable of speed. So for my velocity component, I'm going to export a variable called speed, and I'm going to make it a float. And by default, I'm going to set it to 50 because that's our players. So instantly, we can realize that we have no need for speed in either of these anymore. But we also need to handle the movement. I feel like an important thing that we need to do is break our code into functions. What you want to notice from both of our pieces of code is that we are affecting a vector 2. You can see that in my player code and my enemy code. So maybe what we should realize is we want to affect a vector 2 in some way, and maybe even return it. So I'm going to make a new function, and I'm going to call it moveBody. And then we want to give it a parameter for a direction. So I'm going to call that variable dir. And remember, let's give everything we can a specific static type. So our dir is going to be a vector 2. The next thing that I want to do is I want to also make this return type static. So if I want to just move my body, I think we're going to do a void, meaning we don't have to return anything. So now let's go back into our code and let's realize what we want our body to do. We want to set our body's velocity. So how do we set our body's velocity? Well, that's an important thing. we want to be able to get our body and affect it in some way. So how are we going to affect our body's velocity? Well, there's two ways to handle this. We can directly affect our body's velocity via a parent, or we can change this return type from a void to a vector2 and have all the code inside of our players and enemies. How you do it is up to you, but I'm going to teach you guys the way of affecting our body's velocity directly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new variable, an export variable called body, and it's going to be a character body 2D. The next thing that I want to do is we're going to go back into our func move body, and I'm just going to do body.velocity equals dir, and sometimes I'm a goofball and I input vectors not normalized, so I'm going to do dir.normalized for you guys, and we're going to multiply it by speed. One thing that I'm not going to do is I'm not going to add move and slide inside of this code, because we might want to affect enemies or my velocity differently before we do move and slide. So let's just show what we can do now. Let's go back into our player and let's instantiate our velocity component. In our velocity component's property, we can see that we have a body, and let's assign that body to player. The next thing that I want to do after we add this component in is I want to make a new onReady variable so that we can access our velocity component. So let's do @onReady var velocity component. And what do we usually do? We want to statically type. So our velocity component is going to be type of velocity component, and we can just do the $sign way because it's right under us. Now, in our code, we can just delete this, and we can do velocity component dot move body, and we're going to realize that we don't have a direction to move. So we're going to have to actually do a little bit more code. So I'm going to comment this out, and I'm going to teach you guys the next thing that I find a little bit wrong with the code that we teach you guys. In my own video for Godot 4 intro, I teach you using if statements and all of that, and I showed it to you earlier how we had all those if statements. And I don't think that's very good practice. So I'm going to show you a different way. I'm going to do func, and I'm going to make this function a private function. There's really no private functions in Godot, so what people usually do is put an underscore in first. Now with this function, I'm going to just call it getInput. And in this, I'm going to return a vector2. With getInput, I'm going to make a new variable called dir, and I'm going to make it a vector2. The next thing that I want to show you guys is this really cool function inside of the input class called getVector, which is really important for either 3D movement or top-down multi-directional movement. So we're going to make dir equal to input.getVector. And hopefully you guys have already added your actions in, as this is just like showing you guys what to do. And we can see that there's 4 different entries. We have -x, +x, -y, +y. So -x would be left, +x would be right, -y, well, -y is up in Godot, so we do up, and +y is going to be down. So now that we have that, we can just return dir. I'm also going to delete this code. So now we can go back into our velocity component, and we can just pass in the argument of getInput. The reason why that works is because this returns a vector2, and moveBody takes in a vector2. So now when we press play and we move around, we can see that again, nothing has changed. So why are components better? Well, let's do the same thing in our enemy code. In our enemy, let's get rid of var speed, and let's add in our velocity component. Let's set our body to our enemy, and let's make our enemy a little bit slower with a speed of 35. Let's add in our onReady variable of a velocity component. Now, in here, we can see that we set our velocity with direction times speed, and we can just change that to velocity component dot move body. We can just input our direction. When we press play, again, they're still moving at us. It looks as if nothing changed. Even though it looks like we changed no code, I'm gonna show you two more things that might blow your mind. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a new class name called enemy, because I want all of my enemies to inherit from this class. That means every single enemy I'm going to make is going to have this script. Now there's a couple things wrong with that. First is that our onReady var might not work for every single enemy that we make. So instead of having it onReady, I'm going to change it to export and delete that. Now when we go into our enemy, we can just choose our velocity component. The next thing that I want to change is our hitbox. Now, usually I'd change the hitbox into its own hitbox component, but instead of that, I want to show you guys how to write signals in your own piece of code. So again, I'm going to export another var, and I'm going to make it called a hitbox, and I'm going to make it an area 2D. Now, the reason why I want to show you guys how to connect signals through code is because connecting it through nodes could be a little finicky if you're using the same script in every single enemy. Instead, I'm going to disconnect this method, and it's going to show that it's disconnected. And instead, I'm going to go into func_ready, and we can just do hitbox dot body entered dot connect, and we just pass in the name of our pre-existing function. So now we have to click on our enemy again and assign the hitbox to our area 2D. So now when we do that, we can click main, and we can realize that again, nothing has changed. So you might say, Drew, what's cool about having all of these components, as well as the inheritance of the class name enemy? Well, for this very simple example, we can just make so many different enemies that are basically the same with this effect. So I'm just going to show you, and while this part might not be best practice, I'm just showing you how easy it is to create so many different things with this rule of inheritance and composition. So let's make a new scene. I'm going to create a new other node, and it's going to be a character body 2D because it's an enemy. And I'm going to rename it to, I don't know, I think evil wizard enemy. And then I'm going to save it inside of our enemies folder because we want to be able to access our enemy script. And we're just going to load in our enemy script. So we can press this plus, we can click this folder, and we'll load our enemy script. Now we can see that with our character body 2D, we can assign a player, a velocity component, and a hitbox. First, let's add in our sprite. And thank you so much, Kenny, for being so good at just making art. I'll leave the link in the description of the art set I'm using. And now let's just add in what we need. So let's instantiate the velocity component, and let's set our body to our evil wizard enemy. And let's set, you know what, let's have him be faster. Let's give him 45 speed instead of 35. The next thing that we want to do is we want to actually add in our hitbox. So we'll add an area 2D, and we'll add a collision shape for it. I'm going to change the color of this just so I can separate it from the normal collision shape, which I also need to add in to collide with enemies. To collide with the player, and make that look smaller. And now what I can do is I can assign the velocity component to the velocity component, the hitbox to the area 2D, and I can go into main, and I can instantiate a new evil wizard enemy, and I'm just going to throw him in here, and I'm going to add one on here and one over here. And before we press play, remember we need to add our player here too. So what we can do now is we can press play, and we can realize that we have a faster enemy, and we have just a playable game. So I'm hoping that this tutorial wasn't too much information. This might be a little bit more towards intermediates, but I believe these practices are important when teaching beginners how to code in Godot, because they're actually very important. So if you want more, please let me know. I'm still working on volatility. I did not give up on that development, so maybe you'll see more shorts about that in the future. If you guys made it this far, thank you for giving me so much watch time, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Goodbye, everyone.